Well, I think that I've given this some thought how to explain it. Every tradition, most wisdom traditions, we'll say, have an exoteric pattern side to it and an esoteric pattern, an inner and an outer side to it. In the most general way, I would say that the exoteric part, the outer part, we could call religion, because that often includes, good advice on how to be happy and healthy in your life, how to live in a positive way, how to interact with people in a positive way. It often involves the history of a group. It's always got dogma, which is a belief system, the set of tenets that tradition upholds, and that people who are part of that tradition aspire to and accept. Whereas the esoteric part is the inner part, and that not everybody who practices the outer part practices the inner part as well. We're all at different stages in our development and in our understanding. But all traditions, I would have to say that most that I've come across do have that inner part. It's not like everybody has to suddenly call the inner part yoga. The inner part, yoga means union. Yoga means the interiorization of the consciousness. So that happens anytime you're practicing the inner part of any tradition. And they all have practices that involve breathing exercises and right diet and right living and all of that. So the difference between religion and spirituality, I would say, is religion would be the practice of the outer part, and developing your spirituality, getting in touch with your own spirit nature. That's the inner part.
Good answer. Very nice. Do you get to go up to the Nevada City community on some yearly basis, or?
I get up there several times a year. I lived up there twice in the past. When my twins were really little, it was probably crazy to take them up to the woods for 2 years, but we did. It was fun. Then later on, when everybody was grown, I went up and lived there for 10 years during the 90s. And it was wonderful. Nobody ever wants to leave Ananda, but one leaves when it's time to share outside the community.
That would lead us naturally into, you do a lot of teaching and you're authorized and certified to do that. Will you explain, first of all, what you do as a teacher, but I'd also like you to talk a little bit about the difference between the teacher and the student.
Okay. I first became a minister back in 1981. Swami Kriyananda ordained me. And at the same time, I was already a teacher because when I had first been introduced to Hatha Yoga, I loved it and eventually started teaching it. So I had already been teaching for several years before I actually even found Ananda. As I said, I was looking for a path to seriously study. So at that point in the early 80s, I was ordained a minister. Something that was just naturally bestowed on me. I had never thought before that maybe I should be a minister, but once I became a minister, it seemed like, of course, that was the right thing. Of course, that's my calling. But my ministry has not been congregational in any way. My teaching is my ministry, and my students are my congregation. So that's how my own ministry has unfolded. And so some years later, I also took training as an interfaith minister. So I have 2 ordinations, one as a minister from the yoga path and one as an interfaith minister. And would you repeat that second part of the question, please?
Well, what's involved in the differences between being the teacher or being the student?
Yes. Well, when Swami ordained us, and even when he just asked people to be a teacher, I got very good training from him. He sat us all down and he said, now don't you for a moment think that somehow you're special because you're being given this role to play. He said, no, the reason you're made a teacher is because that's what you need to do in order to grow. And I've never forgotten that, and I've never known one Ananda minister to have a big head, ever. Because what he was saying was, if you have to be the teacher, if your responsibility is to share the teachings with other people, then you have to know those teachings. That means you have to study. That means you have to walk your talk. That means you have to develop your ability to communicate in ways that people can understand. And in doing that, you really learn the teachings. And you stay quite humble in the process. So I would have to say, at least in my experience, I've always considered myself the student till today and probably all my life. I'll never be not a student, because I'm always hoping that I'm growing and studying and working hard toward my goal. But I would have to say teaching's pretty important. It's a great role to have if, in fact, you really want to focus on what's the most important to you.
The group that I sat with there several months ago, do you do other things with those people beyond just gathering together on Sunday morning?
Well, the unique thing about the Ananda experience is that it is a community. One of Yogananda's goals when he came to America was to encourage people of like mind to gather together. And so, of course, people in faith traditions understand that spiritual community. But in Yogananda's case, he also encouraged people to go out in the woods, live simply, and be together so that your friends would be your fellow devotees. And you would worship together, you would work together, you would raise your children together, you would go on vacations together. Basically, you would work together so that every day of your life you saw each other and mirrored back to each other what your goals truly were, and it helps you not to forget. So Ananda, the community of Ananda is very much the fulfillment of a dream of Yogananda's, that these spiritual communities should take hold. So Swami Kriyananda has said that even when he was a young man, he wanted to start a community. And then when he became a disciple of Yogananda and he realized that that was one of Yogananda's dreams as well, he decided he was going to do it. So that he came to Nevada City in 1968, and he brought his students from San Francisco, and they started this community. It's got a great history. So we're very much of the concept of community. So after a while, after about 10 years, Swami decided that we pretty much had the idea of community down. It was working well in Nevada City, and so he started branch communities. And the one in Sacramento was the first one. Now we have Portland, Seattle, Dallas, Rhode Island, and we have two big communities, one in India and one in Assisi, Italy.
Do your children follow the yoga path?
Of the four of them, they're all very good people, very good people. My two older children have not followed the path in any real outward sense because as I came to it, they were already grown and their lives have gone in different directions. But the twins grew up at Ananda. There's a school there, and they had a much more integral experience with the community and with the teachings, and so they're much more connected to them.
I ask you that because my wife and I have 5 children, and I guess when the first baby was born, I just thought all of our babies would be the same. And they
Not so.
come with such distinct personalities and direction and choices.
And from what a yogi would say, also their own karma, in the sense of their own mission. They all come. We each come in with a different purpose for this particular incarnation. And I know I learned very early on to respect that as my children grew into their teenage years and I watched them grow up. I've always supported them in whatever direction they wanted to go because their life is not my life. I had certain things to work on in this life, and I've been pursuing them diligently with great dedication. And I hope that they will do the same as they realize what their life's goals are.
We continue to tease our children about we have a life. We're still doing certain things. And
we're not done yet.
Do you have a holy writ of any form or substance that you follow?
Well, the philosophy of yoga comes out of the Indian tradition, which we call the Vedic tradition because we date it back to the Vedas, which are thousands of years old. And out of the Vedas have come many holy scriptures. The Vedas themselves originally were an oral tradition and eventually got written down. And then there are many different holy books that have come down, each one kind of restating the truth in a way that's appropriate for the people of that time. So we hold mostly to the to the Bhagavad Gita, which was written maybe 2,500 years ago, maybe a little bit more. It dates back much further, but it got written down around that time. And I really love that scripture because I call it the Yogi's Handbook. It's only 18 chapters, and it's part of a much bigger epic called the Mahabharata. But the Yogi's Handbook is that 18 chapters that describes the path of yoga. All the teachings of yoga I write in those 18 chapters. So as yogis, we refer to that book more than any of the others.
Do you think it's essential that as a community and a greater Sacramento that we be a spiritual people, or can we survive nicely with some who may not be?
Well, I think everybody does better as a spiritual person. In terms of individuals, the answer can only be, we'll be better off if we're all spiritual. But if you're asking about, acceptance and tolerance of people who are not striving in that same way, again, the answer is of course, because anyone who wants to be spiritual is about inclusivity, not being exclusive, but it's about welcoming everybody, because we understand that we're all a part of each other, we're all a part of God. So we can't isolate or separate out certain individuals because we don't like them for some reason. God made us all.
75 years ago, the emphasis in America was sort of on a council of churches where we would try to get along. But it seems like in the last generation, interfaith has really come to life. What brought you to interfaith in Sacramento?
Yogananda's path, the path of yoga, is an interfaith path. As I said, we don't distinguish between one religion or the other in the sense that only certain people can practice yoga. Instead, we say it doesn't matter what religion you are. You can still practice yoga if you want or not. But so my training is very universal. The path of yoga is universal. It doesn't separate or distinguish individual ways of doing things. It just says if they work for a person, they're fine. So how did I come to interfaith? Is that what you asked?
Yes.
So because that is the attitude of the yogi anyway, when I had the opportunity to become an interfaith minister, I really resonated with that. In fact, I remember someone at one of those early meetings that I went to saying, as he looked around the room of all the people sitting there, it was an informational meeting, what is this training all about? And he said, I would like to suggest that maybe every one of you sitting here at this table has a little bit different point of view from the other people in your tradition. And what he was saying when he elaborated on that, was that we had a somewhat broader vision. In other words, while we loved our tradition, we were totally dedicated to our tradition, we still accepted that other people's traditions were just as valid and just as right for them. And so I think everyone around the table went, that's right, that's us. And so that's when I knew that the studies in interfaith were right for me and that it would be quite appropriate to become an interfaith minister.
Is there something in interfaith that you're passionate about, that you feel like is a trend that should be established stronger?
Well, interfaith education is right at the top of my list. I know what a difference it made to me to directly study each faith tradition when I was going through my training, to directly meet people who loved their tradition, were inspired by it, had been transformed by it, to read the holy books, to go directly to the book and not listen to what somebody else's opinion of that book might be. That has made all the difference. So I'm pretty dedicated to interfaith education, trying to foster and promote programs that help us each to go to the root, go to the source, and help us each to realize one-on-one for ourselves, not because of what somebody else told us, that in fact God's presence is in all these traditions and that we should respect them. Those who live in this way, who are happy with who they are and their own spirituality, they don't hurt anybody else and they don't hate anybody else.
Okay, when you wish upon a star, is there something you wish you could wave your magic wand and change?
I just wish we could all try harder to accept each other and to love each other.
Thank you. It's nice to have you here. Nice to visit with you.
You too.
We've been visiting with Bhavani Girard, an interfaith minister and member of the Board of Trustees. Thank you again.